Welcome back, everyone, from the break. This is the governance track. And in terms of housekeeping, once again, I just wanted to go over a few basic things. If you have not done so yet, let us know who you are by changing your screen name to the naming convention of name, preferred pronoun, affiliation, and country. Also, make sure your sound is muted. And also, if your bandwidth and capabilities allow, we would love for you to turn on your camera so we can see your beautiful faces. But we also understand if you can't or if you don't want to. So it is entirely up to you. And also just, please use the chat to ask questions and engage in the discussion. So you're not here to talk with me. You're not here to listen to me. You're really here to listen to Doctors David Kong and Tom Malone. I don't really feel like I need any additional introduction for these two because we all know how awesome they are. And I also love how these two innovators and their work on the Supermind design dovetail perfectly with Marshall Ganz's powerful words on how and why groups find ways to govern themselves. For everything from generating social good and cohesiveness to increasing capabilities and optimizing efficacy. So I'm really excited to see this approach in action. So without further ado, I pass it on to the doctors.
Yay. Young B, that was like that was the best introduction I think I've ever had for anything. And actually, can we give a round of applause and shout outs to Young B for holding it down in governance all day today? Young B, I've only been able to kind of peripherally watch, but I've seen the vibe in the room from a distance in my screen, and it just seems like everything's been going so awesome there. So just thank you for everything you're doing. And Young B is also so close to joining the doctor club. You're like just a couple of months away from finishing your PhD, right, Young B?
Yes, that's correct.
The last few months, it's those are the key ones, the key months, but you're almost there. But anyways, thank you so much for the introduction, and I'll let Tom introduce himself in just a moment. But just to introduce myself again to you all, I think you guys all know who I am. I'm David Kong, and I direct the Community Biotechnology Initiative at the Media Lab. But in this context, more importantly, I'm so honored to be collaborator with Professor Tom Malone on a wonderful methodology called Supermind Design. And so today we've got basically a good amount of time together. I've got a 90-minute session. The way that today's agenda is going to work is Tom and I are going to start with some discussion about what Supermind Design actually is, what the methodology is, and Tom is going to give some insights on that and give a little presentation. We're going to have an open discussion about this methodology just to answer any questions from you all. I will then, because I didn't have a chance to earlier today, go in greater detail into how we actually use the methodology to generate the prompts that you all saw that were part of the governance exercise. And then we can spend some time just like talking about the exercise itself and where it came from, how did we come up with it, and so on. And as Young B said, it was such a journey to get to this point. I know for you all, you're like, oh, there's this beautiful website and we click these buttons and we go do this thing. And actually, as it was unfolding, Tom was messaging me earlier being like, oh, do we have time to talk a little bit about how it went? All I know is I was able to kind of look at each Mingler group, Tom, and it was amazing. It was like a giant lobby of people and like actual talking happening, and the sheets were like filling up, and so I kept joking with the organizers. I was like, it's working, it's working. Like this whole day actually for me has been like the conference is working. It's like all the stuff that we planned that we thought was theoretical is actually happening. So I've just been really excited about all of it. But the exercise I thought really looked like it was going pretty well. I think after people kind of figured out how to log into the groups, which took a little bit, then I think it really flowed and it seemed like the exercise was working really well. But I think another part of this too, and we'll really try to keep this an open discussion with all of you, we really want to hear your feedback on the exercise and on the methodology broadly. So I think those are just some opening remarks. And again, I think after Tom talks a little bit more about the methodology itself, again, I'll reconnect it back to Marshall's work, because for me, this is, I think, one of the most fascinating parts is, you've got a pedagogy and a process like Marshall's process on statement of shared work, and how they really try to make explicit these implicit aspects of movement. And then you've got something like the Supermind Design methodology, which is really about innovating and thinking about systems. And I think we've managed to figure out a way to kind of put these two things together in a potentially really exciting new way, applied very specifically to community bio and our larger movement around grassroots life sciences, but I think could also be applied to a lot of other movements and a lot of other efforts as well. So those are just some opening thoughts and remarks, and I'll turn it over to Tom. In introducing Tom, I will say, Tom is the father of collective intelligence. He is the person that coined that term, and I think has really been driving this idea and this concept for, I think, at least 10 years now, right, Tom? So it's been quite a while. And Tom has written a really amazing book called Superminds, which talks a lot about different types of these kind of human groups that can be organized in a variety of different ways, which Tom will talk more a little bit about. And beyond all of that, I think Tom is just one of the loveliest humans that I know, and it's been such an honor and pleasure to work with him over the past couple of years. So I'll turn it over to Tom now to share some thoughts about Supermind Design.
Well, thank you, David. And I first want to correct some of the mistakenly positive things that were said about me in this introductory session. I think, as Young B said, David certainly needs no introduction to this group, but I'm assuming most people in this group don't know me, other than what David just said. In addition to what David said, I'm a professor in the Sloan School of Management, director of the Center for Collective Intelligence. I also want to correct what David said. I did not coin the phrase collective intelligence. That phrase has been used for over 100 years at least, and I think maybe hundreds of years. I guess I do feel I had some role in helping to popularize that phrase, especially as a topic of research, and helped to build a research community about that topic, and was the founder of the MIT Center for Collective Intelligence. So I don't want you to get too incorrectly positive an impression. But it is really wonderful to be here with David. I've really enjoyed working with David, and I think I would certainly echo the positive things he said about me, about David. Not only a really smart and creative guy, but a great human being, I think. So after that mutual admiration, I guess before I tell you any more about Supermind Design, I'd like to hear a little bit more from the people in the group here now, what the exercise was like today in the noontime session. I was there for listening to Marshall's talk, and I saw the beginning of the work with the Google Docs and the Mingler groups, but I had to leave for another meeting at 1 o'clock, so I didn't see very much, and would be really interested to hear just at least a couple of comments from people in the room now about what the exercise was like for you and how you think it went.
So for this, you can just unmute yourselves if you have a comment. But yeah, we'd love to hear your reactions. And we know this could be, 4 p.m. Eastern time shyness too, but we would love to hear your thoughts.
Is this not a group that's used to talking?
Well, I think people are still getting to know each other a little bit. This is the first day of the event, so everybody may be a little bit shy, getting loose a little bit. But we can maybe call on a couple of people who I know will likely answer. For example, Salman, who is a part of is actually a student and a listener in a class that Tom and I are teaching this semester. Salman, were you able to participate in the activity?
Yeah, I actually in Supermind activities, a couple of. So from the first class, so I have seen, I was like kind of like skeptical if I am being able to, participate in any sort of things like that. But when Professor, I must say here, Professor and David here, this duo creates this environment, and we actually can get ourselves into that. And this Supermind and collective intelligence exercise, that creates some kind of environment that that pushes you to, think behind and look into the problems, make solutions, and like create this singularity. I mean, like all the minds together. So I believe this is amazing. This is an amazing situation where you'll be able to have this feeling that you are kind of like connected with other people and thinking together. So that's kind of it. But there are so many other things. That's kind of like top of my head. So thank you so much.
Cool.
Yeah, and could we get, oh, go ahead, Tom, sorry.
I was going to say, maybe we could just let people vote in the participants window about whether you participated in the exercise right after Marshall's talk. So if you participated, why don't you click yes, and if you did not, why don't you click no? In the meantime, anyone else is welcome to make comments.
I would like to comment on that. It was really interesting because I have been using like shared documents for a long time, but really few times you're working at the same time in the document, even if it's a shared one. So you could literally feel the whole group like participating, and it was quite inspiring.
Cool. That's something we've noticed before. And the first time we tried it, I didn't know what was going to happen, but it feels almost magical to say, oh, well, let's work on this problem. And then you go to the Google Doc and say to people, put in your ideas. And then you just see sort of magically all these ideas growing in front of you. So I'm really glad you like that. That's something I find really cool when we do this too. It looks like we have 3 people who participated in the exercise and nobody said no. So at least we have 3 people here, but maybe that's why others didn't have anything to volunteer. Anybody else who was there in the exercise this morning or this afternoon?
I think Eugene Fong gave a thumbs up, but actually before we ask Eugene, Alec, is it Alakai, or I want to make sure I pronounce your name correctly?
Aliki.
Aliki. Could you say, were you able to interact with, what did you think about Mingler as well, mixed in with the Google Doc? Was that combination interesting for you?
Actually, in the mingle, we got into a conversation that didn't have to do a lot with the document. So I feel like we need like an in-between step between getting to know the person and actually working on something, because it was more the intention of getting to know a new person than actually putting our hands on the document.
So I actually think that's fine. David acted like that was a bad thing, but I was really struck by what Marshall said about the importance of building relationships in a group. That's kind of what makes the group a real group. And so I think even if all people did with Mingler was make social kind of relational connections with other people, it would still be very useful. And if you can use it to collaborate on document 2, that seems great.
I would like to add something more. I don't know if it's helpful, but then maybe it is. Like, as I have been interacting in the group chats and in Mingle and in the Google Documents, you kind of start seeing people that you have a stronger connection, without even knowing the person. So it's an interesting field of getting closer without knowing the actual person. I don't know if it helps, but yeah.
That's cool.
Actually, I love that comment because in the design of this conference, which is a whole nother topic of its own, we're interacting with each other in at least 4 platforms, right? There's Slack, there's Zoom, there's Mingler, there's all the chats, there's the Google Docs. So there's so many different digital means with which we're actually interacting with each other. And each one of them in the design of the conference actually we thought about each one of them as a different mode in a different way. And so, this is sort of part of my opening remarks. We have no idea what was going to work and what was going to, not work, right? So I personally had kind of 0 expectations about like what was going to be effective and what wasn't. But it's a really interesting observation or comment to say that through this kind of network of different digital means that we are still able to get some kind of connection, which I think is really, really interesting. And it's hard today, right? We normally in BioSummit in person, there's a certain standard kind of way of human connection that we're used to, and also a mode of creativity that we're used to. And so trying to figure out what tools are going to work and what combination of tools might work, I think is honestly, it's really interesting research actually, which is something that Tom and I have been thinking about as well. And so part of what I really have been excited about with this governance exercise is that we are combining at least 3 different kinds of tools into a type of creativity forum in a way. And so I think for everybody here, I'm going to mispronounce your name again. Is it Alakai?
Aliki.
Aliki, I'm so sorry. Aliki. It would be interesting as the weekend goes on for you to just think about that more and just let us know what's evolving for you and which platforms resonate and you feel like you're more creative on, or you're feeling like you're getting more engagement and connection with people on versus others, or combinations therein. I think that would be really cool to learn about too.
Absolutely.
Aliki, ευχαριστώ.
Παρακαλώ.
That sounded like Greek to me.
Literally.
Okay, Should we do a little more discussion, or shall I start with some slides and description of the methodology?
I think, Tom, we had one other hand raised in there. Was it Eugene? Yeah, Eugene, go for it.
Had some trouble getting Mingler to work. I may have run into bugs and it just didn't work at all for me, or no one was talking in it. I'm not sure.
So you were able to log in,
There's a
but
lot of
then
activity in the Google Docs.
you were able to log in, but then when you tried to use Mingler,
I logged into Mingler, but just nothing. When I tried to click on people talking on it, or they had missed it.
So you cut out just a little bit there. You said
I'm not really sure.
so you tried to connect to somebody and then it went into the video conference, but no one was there, or?
No, nothing. I didn't get any conference at all. It just said connecting the whole time. ...
Ah.
There
Okay.
was a list of people, but just it didn't work.
Okay, that sounds like a difficult to debug
It goes by
problem.
very quickly, and chats tend to get lost.
Yeah. Okay. It's possible that the browser you were using was one that didn't work with the video conferencing tool. But anyway, we can talk about that later if that's okay. I'd be very interested in trying to track down the bug a little more.
Yeah, I did like the Zoom chat though. I had a lot of great Zoom chats. It's just there's so many of them and they run by really quickly. It gets hard to read them and see which.
Cool. Actually, I see a comment from Carolina said you reached me, but I didn't have a chance to react. Could she be talking about Eugene?
I mean, yes, because like I saw that Eugene popped on my window, but I didn't have a chance to accept it because he disappeared. And then somebody else approached me, so I clicked the other person. And that was just like, I think that the key is to just wait there, and people are like if somebody is speaking with somebody, you're just like in some kind of a queue, and then like randomly people are like having space to talk to you, but it doesn't have to happen like immediately. Like you have to just be patient with that.
So I think these are good technical bits of feedback that yeah, we can definitely follow up on and debug later. But very good to know about them.
Yes.
But yeah, Tom, go for it. I think we can maybe go into your presentation.
Okay, great. So I'm going to share my screen and show you a few slides. And I'm happy to do questions all along the way if anybody wants to either just talk out or raise a blue hand if you know how to do that. And I'll try to give you a little bit of a sense of the methodology that was behind the questions that you had to fill out this morning or early this afternoon, depending on where you are in the world. I want to just give you, so we basically use this Supermind Design methodology as a way of generating the questions that you were filling out in the Google Doc. And I'll give you just a little bit of an idea about what's behind that. So here is the first page of what we call the Supermind Design Primer, which just answers some basic questions about what Supermind Design is. Supermind we define as a group of individuals acting together in ways that seem intelligent. So lots and lots of things are superminds by that definition. All the companies, all the governments, all the local communities, all the scientific communities, lots and lots of things you know of, they're all examples of what we would call superminds. And Supermind Design is just the process of designing these things. We do it using a series of moves, which we'll talk more about in just a minute. We think Supermind Design is useful whenever you want to generate especially innovative possibilities for how to design systems with interacting parts. That's very general, but we're specifically focused on groups of people and computers. So Supermind Design is related to lots of other kinds of design. Many of you probably have heard about design thinking or agile design or participatory design. Those are all other ways of doing design. And Supermind Design is, in many cases, complementary with those other ways of designing things. So design thinking, for instance, is mostly focused on what they call user-centered design, designing things that are good for their users. Supermind Design is focused on designing superminds, like designing organizations or how groups will work together. When Marshall was talking earlier today, he talked about the importance of how we structure authority and how work is organized. So Supermind Design is specifically about how to answer questions like the ones Marshall was talking about tonight. And it uses a series of moves or questions that trigger new ideas about how to do that. And it can be used often together with, say, design thinking or whatever. So here are the 6 key moves that we talk about. The first 3 are basic design moves that are used in designing almost anything. The second 3 are design moves that are specifically focused on designing new kinds or even old kinds of superminds, as we just defined it. Well, let's just go quickly through these different types, these different moves. But before I do that, let me just show you one example of how you can use a sequence of moves to get from some starting problem to an interesting idea. So this is an example we did working with Takeda Pharmaceuticals. It's possible even that some people in this group today were part of the MIT Supermind that was involved in that project. Basically, they were interested in how to deal with depression among adults in Japan. And one part of that problem is how to diagnose depression. So the problem we're focused on here is how can a doctor diagnose depression initially. But then we apply this move called Groupify to say, well, let's think about that as how can a doctor's office diagnose depression? And then we use another move called Zoom Out to say, how can the whole healthcare system diagnose depression? Zoom out again, how can society diagnose depression? And you can zoom in from that to say, how can communities diagnose depression? You can technify that to say, how can online social networks diagnose depression? You can do what we call cognify to that and say, how can online social networks sense depression? And then you can technify that to say, well, maybe machine learning could detect communication patterns that people have when they're communicating in an online social network, and that some of those patterns might actually be signs that the person is depressed. So you could use machine learning of social network interaction to predict or detect depression. So that seems like an interesting idea. You got there, or we got there by this series of moves. Of course, there are lots of other ways you could use the moves, and in general, we expect people to generate dozens or hundreds of moves, branching off from each place in many directions and so forth. That makes sense? Let me just pause for questions if anybody has any questions.
And you can just unmute yourself to ask if you have a question.
Okay, well, let me just give you a quick view of the different moves. So the first move is what we call zoom in, which is about focusing on a part or a type of the problem or the solution that you're talking about. For instance, if you started with sell groceries, you could zoom in to say, well, part of selling groceries is stocking shelves. Or if you're trying to develop a cybersecurity strategy, you could zoom in and say, part of that would just be analyzing the potential threats. Those are both parts. You can also zoom in based on types. So if you're selling food, you could zoom into one way or type of selling food, which is selling food from a truck. If you're starting with hiring someone, you could zoom into one way of hiring, which is hiring them as a contractor. So that's zoom in. Zoom out is the opposite of zoom in. It's focusing on a larger whole of which the thing you started with is a part or a type. So if you're starting with stocking shelves, you could zoom out to groceries, selling groceries. If you're starting with placing a help wanted ad, you could zoom out to hiring an employee. Those are the parts. If you focus on types, you could start with flying on a plane and zoom out to travel, because flying on a plane is only one way of doing travel. Or you could start with staffing a consulting engagement team and zoom out to matching people with compatible attributes. That's zoom out. And then the third basic move is analogize, where you're using analogies to suggest new ideas. You can even view that as a combination of zooming out first and then zooming in. So if you were trying to figure out how to sell dog walking services, you could use an analogy with Uber and say we could create the Uber of dog walking. I understand there actually is such a thing, even though I think we used the example before we knew that it actually existed. If you're trying to form project teams, you might make an analogy with Match.com and say, let's create the Match.com of team formation. So those are one kind of analogy, which is to start with successful case examples like Uber or Wikipedia or Tinder. Another way, and a more generally powerful way of looking for analogies, is to think about if zooming in is like going from a parent to a child, and zooming out is like going from a child to a parent, then a good way of finding analogies is to start with one idea, then zoom out to its parent and zoom out to its grandparent at many levels as you want, and then zoom in to some other relatives, which are either aunts and uncles or cousins at various types from the place you started. So in other words, you first generalize and then you specialize, zoom out, then zoom in. So if, for instance, if you want to think about how to design cars very rapidly, you could say, well, what are some, designing cars is an example of designing products. What are some other examples of designing products that are very rapid? Well, daily newspapers design a new product every day. How do they do that? Well, they use things like modularizing and filling in the different modules a different day, et cetera. So you could use that as an analogy between designing cars and designing newspapers to get ideas about how to design cars more rapidly. Similarly, you could look for analogies for how to create trust, either the way you do it in eBay or how the New York diamond merchants do it, et cetera. So those are examples of analogies. Now let's talk about the Supermind design moves, things that are specifically focused on Superminds. The first is the move called Groupify, which is to view an activity as being done by a group, not an individual. For instance, if you started with doctor diagnosing depression, you could go to doctor's office diagnosing depression. Or if you started with the team leader decides which report to send to client, you could groupify to the team votes on whether the report is ready to send to a client. One important thing here is that there are 5 different types of superminds described in my book, as David suggested. The 5 are shown here. The first and most obvious is hierarchies, where group decisions are made by delegating them. Next is democracies, where group decisions are made by voting. Third is markets, where group decisions are essentially a whole bunch of pairwise agreements between individual buyers and sellers. A third is communities, where group decisions are made by a kind of informal consensus based on shared norms and reputations. And the fifth is what happens when you don't have any cooperation among the group members. It's an ecosystem where the group decisions are made just by power, by the law of the jungle. Whoever has the most power gets what they want. So that was a very fast definition of 5 basic kinds of groups, which I think account for almost all the groups we see around us. Most situations include some combination of those different 5 types, but they really account for a lot of things we see. And so when you use the Groupify move, a useful, very useful thing to do is for each kind of decision and often each kind of activity, you can think, how could that activity or that decision be done or made by a hierarchy? Could it be made by a democracy? Could it be made by a market? Could it be made by a community, et cetera? So that's a way of generating new ideas that you, in many cases, would never have thought of if you're just kind of thinking. Let me pause for a minute there. Any questions?
Yeah, I have one, if you don't mind.
Yes, please.
What's kind of the interrelationship or the relationship that you note between kind of innovation and expertise and that kind of because experts in some ways can be the best of allies when it comes to innovation because they understand a particular phenomenon in a very deep and meaningful way, but that may also mean that experts may be fixed in a very specific mindset and in a very specific approach. So could you kind of elaborate a bit more on maybe the relationship between expertise and the kind of not success or failure, but the implementation of the Superminds design with expertise in mind?
So I think you're talking about the question of how best to kind of come up with new designs for Superminds rather than to do whatever it is the Supermind is doing, right?
Right.
I think there are certainly times when having expertise is extremely useful. There are other times when having expertise may keep your mind too restricted and you don't even think of things that others might think of that would be useful. So I wouldn't say either one is always best. I think the right thing is to have the right kind of combination.
Mm-hmm.
One way of doing things is to let experts define some of the key problems and then let other people think of ways of solving those problems, which the experts might never have thought of.
Mm.
And then let the experts evaluate the solutions to see which ones could actually work, including hopefully they may see some they wouldn't have ever thought of, but when they see it, they think, wow, that could really work.
Mm.
So that's at least one model for combining experts and non-experts. I think there are quite a few other possible ways they can work together, but if you were thinking I was going to say it's always better to have one or always better to the other, I'm not going to say that.
No, I mean, I'm sure it's context dependent, right? So, absolutely. Thank you.
Yes.
Actually, if you don't mind, Tom, I'd like to just build on that a little bit. So,
Yes.
Young B, I think you're bringing up a point that is, it's actually very connected in a way to this community as well, and other broader kind of community-based organizations or movements that are trying to do innovation. One thing I thought a lot about is this question of like, when is it useful to have experts, like quote unquote experts, like people that have actually spent, and I'm defining expert here not as necessarily somebody that has a degree, but somebody that actually has deep expertise in a domain area.
Right.
Versus people that don't necessarily have deep expertise in a domain area, but are creative, have skills in a wide array of areas. And so what's sort of like the optimal mixture of people that have deep expertise versus not in generating innovative solutions to different kinds of problems? For a long time, I think I was sort of like, well, why do we need experts? Like we just need you don't necessarily have to have deep expertise to solve a lot of different types of problems. But I think, as even in the context of community bio, DIY bio and grassroots science, I think there's this really interesting question of like, when are experts useful? How can they be useful in, for example, like framing problems, which is also a potential area. But I think that particular topic is a very, very rich one that, I don't know the exact answer for, and I think your point about it being context dependent makes a lot of sense. But I think it's just something that I just wanted to highlight, that I think you're onto a really great overall research theme in a way.
Yeah, just because I think that it's going to look very different within the community bio situation as opposed to, say, a far more conservative and kind of expertise and institution laden area like, say, national defense or diplomacy. So it's going to the way that these structures kind of have flexibility and bendability based on who the participants are, who the experts are, things like that. I think, yeah, very context dependent.
Yeah, okay, actually, I hadn't thought of your question in the context of community bio, which must be what you were thinking of. And I think it's very interesting that many things we think require experts, at least in the degree defined sense of expert, definitely do not require experts and often can be done better without the kind of blinders that experts sometimes have. For instance, you used national defense. If I can generalize that a little bit to military action, you could say that a lot of terrorist groups have developed some extremely effective forms of what's pretty close to military action without any of the expertise of traditional generals. They found ways that the blinkered military leaders often have very poor defenses for.
Mm-hmm.
Is that kind of similar to what you're getting at?
Yeah, so yeah, I mean, I'll say yes at this point because I want this conversation to continue forward, and but I would love to connect with both of you offline with this if you're interested.
Sure,
Cool.
yeah. I was probably taking us down a little rat hole there, so thanks for not pursuing it. Okay, good. So let's go on to another move, which is the Groupify move. There it says a useful thing to do often is to zoom in on the different cognitive processes that a supermind does. So you could say that if you're diagnosing depression, you could focus on the sensing cognitive process and sense the symptoms that might indicate depression. Or if you're selling consulting engagements, you could focus on the deciding processes and focus on deciding, for instance, what fee structure to propose. In general, like there are 5 different types of superminds, and it's useful to analyze the possibilities for each. There are also 5 different basic cognitive processes that we talk about in the methodology. Create, decide, sense, remember, and learn. So by focusing on each of those, you can often realize aspects of your problem that you might not have thought of. You might realize, well, we thought the main problem was making a decision, but in order to do that, we have to sense what's going on, or maybe remember what happened in the past, or even just create good options to decide among, or learn from our experience. So just thinking about that can often trigger new ideas about things you could do to help solve your problem. Then the last move is the Technify move. In some ways, that's probably the most obvious, but often useful to think of it systematically. How could we do whatever it is we're talking about by using technology, perhaps in some new way? So making a group decision, you could technify that by saying, let's make a group decision using online voting. Or manager assigning people to tasks, you could technify that by saying, maybe an online algorithm could assign people to tasks. One way of thinking about this is to think of 4 different roles that computers can play when they're working in groups with humans. They can be a tool where they're just doing what you tell them to, like a word processor. They can be an assistant where they sometimes take more initiative, like a spell correction algorithm. They can be a peer, like the programs that buy and sell stocks with humans as their counterparties often. Or computers can even be managers, like if you have a system that automatically routes calls to different humans in a telephone call center, that would be a system, a computer that's working more or less like a manager. Another way of thinking about the uses of technology is this, where you can use technology to automate people's jobs or people's work. You can use it to involve more people than would be possible otherwise. Or you can use it to organize in many new ways, hyper-specializing, parallelizing, etc. So each of these could be triggers for ideas you might not otherwise have thought of about how you could design or redesign a supermind. So the summary of what I've just been saying is captured, I think, by these 6 questions. Basically, the 6 moves we've talked about are a way of systematically asking yourself all of these questions whenever you're trying to solve a problem. What's the bigger picture? What are the different parts or types? What are useful analogies? How could different types of groups or superminds help? What are the cognitive processes involved? And how could technology of various types help? So the conclusions I'd like to leave are, first, that the moves in the Supermind design methodology can stimulate creative ideas for designing many kinds of organizations and other groups. Second, that we used these moves to generate the questions in the exercise some of you did earlier today, and all of you will presumably do now. And finally, even if you didn't have somebody who generated questions for you, if you know and learn how to use these moves, you can use them to generate a whole set of useful questions for yourself in potentially lots of different projects you may do in the future. So that's all the slides I have, and very happy to have more discussion about this.
That's great, Tom. I think, Tom, if you take away the share screen, I think we can go into a gallery view and see all of each other.
Great.
Which I would recommend. So we can all go, if you go view and then go gallery, then we can all look at each other. And again, we encourage you to turn on your videos if you're able to, just so we can get a little bit more, to coin Marshall's, to use Marshall's term of relational connection. I think that's one of the key parts about the BioSummit. So we do encourage you to turn on your monitors if you can. Thank you, thank you. But yeah, so why don't we take some questions about the methodology? Just in general. And then what I'll do is I'll bring us into the actual governance exercise, and I'll show you how we use the methodology to come up with some of the prompts. And then we'll spend the rest of the time in the exercise. And part of what I think is a little bit neat about how we design the governance exercise is that you can actually create your own prompts, which in a way is the same thing as using the methodology that Tom just showed you to actually generate some more ideas. So, but I can explain that in greater detail in a moment. But first, any questions about the methodology itself, the moves? Did it seem useful, interesting? Are you curious to try it?
They sound really interesting, and it kind of sounded like he was going towards, instead of just having only one, to have multiple actually for different kinds of tasks, and then have different groups evaluating each other. This kind of sounds like you're actually getting towards now a number 6 version of a Supermind. Not just 5 separate ones, but a combined version.
Absolutely. In fact, I guess I didn't say it just now, but something I very often say when I describe these is to say that in the real world, most real situations involve more than one of these Supermind types. If you have a community, for instance, like a local community, a geographical community, a lot of what goes on is just, this is the way we do things around here. These are things we really care about. That's a community. But often there'll be a local government, which is elected by a democracy and then works as a hierarchy to do things like make sure the sewers are working and the garbage get collected and things like that. So you've got at least all 3 of those things going at the same time. And of course, essentially all communities have a market going too. People are buying and selling things to each other and to people outside of the community. And behind all the other superminds is an ecosystem. So ultimately, whoever has the most power wins. But in an organized society, we put that power in the hands of the government, usually. So the government, we rely on the government to use its physical power to do police work and to defend us from other people who might try to attack us militarily. And then once that aspect of power is taken care of in a way that, at least in a democratic society, is typically managed by a democratically elected hierarchy, then we can use the other methods of organizing much better than if we were always worried about physical threats of various kinds. So short answer, yes, you're exactly right. It's very common to have combinations of 2 or more of these Supermind types.
So I'm seeing in the chat a really interesting comment from Samir in London. Samir, do you want to just say this out loud, actually? If you're there, you can unmute yourself. I'm happy to read your question as well, but
hey,
go ahead.
Thank you. An excellent presentation, Thomas. That was fantastic. Sorry I don't have a webcam on my laptop, but I'm just, I guess, drawing an analogy between governance of social systems and protein interactions, DNA processes, and other molecular activities that go on inside of a cell. And wondering if you were to choose your supermind types to assign to those processes, how many of them could you identify? Could you identify like a market behavior within the cell or and so on?
That's a fascinating question. And I'm not an expert on the cell processes like presumably all of you are, but I'd love to hear other people's thoughts about how different cell processes might be analogous to things like a market or a hierarchy or community, etc. Anybody have ideas?
And actually, if you all would like, you can chat your ideas. This can actually be a recurring theme throughout, because I love this topic. And actually, if you think about this larger field of biomimicry, right, which is basically taking inspiration from biology and then applying those metaphors into other settings. That's kind of in a way what you're talking about, but I think in reverse. But actually, Tom and I have had some funny conversations about this too, where I was explaining to Tom like some aspects of microbiome science, right? So microbes on our bodies behave in communities, right? So you hear this term used all the time in science, microbial communities inside the gut. You've got trillions of organisms interacting in a certain way. And yeah, so Forum is saying, is the microbial community behaving like a marketplace, which I think is an interesting question. I think there's another question in the metaphor too, which is, what does a fecal matter transplant look like? If you're suddenly all of a sudden completely wiping out a community in that case, how does that extend your metaphor? But I really love this question, Samir. So yeah, but if other people do have thoughts on biological metaphors for Superminds, I think put them in the chat. That's really neat. Oh, Eugene's got a couple. Exactly. Yeah, this is great. Democracy, quorum sensing between bacteria, hierarchy, nucleus, and then the the dogma, the central dogma.
Yeah, that's really cool.
Very cool. Yeah, very interesting.
A is the CEO, and it dispatches its delegates as RNA to do the factory work with proteins. That's very interesting.
Very cool. Are there other questions? Thoughts, comments, either on this thread or other threads? Yeah, go ahead, Ibrahim.
I was wondering if those three are a set that maybe there is a fourth way that cell can adapt to somehow a more dimensional, if that makes sense. So because it's really fascinating when you think about the cell, what happens inside the cell, and then try to apply those three type of Supermind design. So I'm just wondering about maybe all of them together with something else.
Yeah, certainly there's certainly ecosystem going on there. The longer definition of ecosystem is not just the law of the jungle, whoever has the most power wins, but also the survival of the fittest. So that's certainly going on inside cells or the microbiome. Different species of the microbes or whatever they are in the microbiome. Some are winning more than they're losing and growing in power, and others are not. And there's some kind of equilibrium, perhaps at any given moment. So there's certainly ecosystem going on, as well as some of the other things too.
We got a proposal from ISIS, which I love, which is to start a Google Doc to write some of these down. They're still coming in here. Some really nice ones from Eugene on markets and intestinal microbiomes. This is really cool, guys. You should definitely, ISIS, you should feel free to make a Google Doc and then just put them in there. Actually, if we've got a note, do we have our session notes? Is that up someplace, Desiree and team? Because that would be a good place to put it.
We have not had a note taker for the session. She was going to help. But
yeah, no worries, no worries.
I knew we were recording.
Yeah, actually, Isis, if you wanted to, you can make a doc and then we can put it inside the participant drive at the end. So you could just make a doc randomly and then we can write stuff in there. That's a really neat idea.
We do have notes at the end of the track notes, or the track notes and attendance sheet. I can add that link again if people haven't seen it.
Yeah, actually that'd be great too. If you all want to stay in touch, there's a session notes that Desiree is going to link to that also has an attendance sheet, so you can write your information in there. So we can continue the conversation after this is over. I want to be a little bit mindful of time because I want to make sure that you all have an opportunity to go and actually experience Mingler if you hadn't had a chance to do that earlier today, which it sounds like most of you have not. So if it's okay, what I'm going to do is transition into the governance exercise, and I'll briefly explain how we came up with it. And then I think, Tom, if this sounds good to you, I can just speak for like maybe 5 minutes about this, and then we'll let you all interact and actually do the exercise and just, you know, enjoy, have fun for maybe like 30 minutes. And then we can bring it all back together for a debrief for about 10 minutes at the end. Does that sound like a good agenda to everybody? Okay, cool. So let me share my screen then, and let me show you guys. So this is definitely the behind the scenes doc that Tom and I were working in to just like take notes about how we wanted to potentially do this exercise. So, so we have here our shared purpose, right? So our shared purpose is to fundamentally transform life sciences and democratize biotechnology, to inspire creativity and improve lives by organizing life science change makers and bioenthusiasts to build an inclusive global network. Now, that's the first part of the statement. For those of you that missed this earlier in the morning, at Biosummit 2.0, the larger community did a big co-design exercise, and we developed a statement. This is based on Marshall Ganz's pedagogy, who gave one of the talks earlier this morning. And so this act of creating a statement of shared purpose, in movements, it's incredibly valuable because it's all about basically making explicit, implicit aspects of what this larger group is doing together, right? And if you think about a lot of other groups too, you know, even like the maker movement or other things, like you might be able to point to and think about what their goals may be and who's doing it. But the act of actually making explicit, implicit aspects, I think is really critical and a big part of what Marshall's kind of framework is connected to. And so with Supermind Design, as Tom has been describing, Supermind Design is a really great innovation process. It's a great way to generate lots and lots of different ideas. And so what Tom and I did was we looked at the statement of shared purpose, and then we actually analyzed the different clauses of the overall statement and basically used the methodology to try and kind of break down the statement into different chunks. So for example, when we look at this larger question of building an inclusive network, we started asking, and I'm going to go down here because the terms decide, these go to the Cognify move. So when we're thinking about different ways, you remember that Tom actually put decide as one of the key questions. So we basically, without placing judgment, we're not saying one thing is better than the other. We basically started asking, okay, well, what are the things that we'd have to decide about the global network? So one question is, who's a member, right? And then after we wrote that, we gave a couple of other ideas. So, you know, how does one become it? How do we have to decide, how do you become a member? How do we sense who should be a member but doesn't know it yet, right? So this is us just kind of applying the moves in a fairly systematic way to just generate more prompts. So we'd have to decide, how do you make decisions? You have to decide what are the norms of the community. You'd have to decide what are the goals of the community, right? So these are just kind of logical, in a way, application of the moves that allows you to generate questions that connect directly to the essence of how do we create an inclusive global network. And so we did this basically systematically for each one of the clauses. So the second clause in the next prompt, I guess, in the overall statement is, in terms of activities, is cultivating accessible commons of knowledge and resources. So similar here, what kinds of knowledge and resources? Are they physical resources? Are they knowledge resources? How do we share them and make these knowledge resources more accessible, et cetera? So we basically went through this in this process to generate these prompts and also generate some answers to these prompts. You'll see this one here is a direct application of the analogies move that Tom shared. So, you know, what new ideas do the following analogies suggest for how to do things above? So here we started thinking about, in this case, other types of resources, right? So in the case of the life sciences, you know, knowledge resources might be like, you know, a protein database bank or like sequences of DNA, but non-life sciences kind of knowledge resources would be like libraries or encyclopedias, right? So this goes very much back to the analogize move that Tom was sharing. So, anyway, so this is basically what we're doing here and how we generated these prompts. And what I'll do now is show you, after we generated these prompts, we actually worked with Salman and Shrestha to build out the Google Sheets. Okay, so this is now the website. So all of you actually, if you're able to in your own browser, open up the website www or biosummit.live/governance is the URL. I'll put this in the chat for those of you that would like it in the chat. So this is the URL where the exercise lives. And And again, it's built off the statement of shared purpose. And here what we've done is for each one of the clauses that are kind of connected to ultimately realizing how, you know, in a way, getting at the essence of how do we realize the statement is a Google Doc. So if you click build an inclusive network, you click this and it brings you over to a Google Doc that has all of these prompts that I just shared with you, that Tom and I used the Supermind Design methodology to generate these prompts. And then we created these worksheets where now people can give examples of contributions. So who's a member of the global network? Now in a co-editing way, we can all get in here and actually create more create more rows and answer the question. The next one's how do you become a member of the network? And then again, more examples and more people can vote on it and so on. And so you can see, wow, I actually haven't looked at this sheet before. So it's pretty cool to see it actually filled out and people contributing stuff to it. This is awesome. And the other really neat thing here is create your own prompt, right? So make your own prompt. So I can see some people made some. What are the values of the global network? What's the mission of the global network? This is interesting. So, it looks like people created new prompts. And so you can use some of the moves that Tom was describing as a part of making these new prompts as well. And so there's a Google sheet for each one of these four prompts. So number 1 is build an inclusive network. 2 is cultivate an accessible commons of knowledge and resources, and so on. The next neat part, though, is that each one of these prompts is connected to a Mingler group. Okay, so how many of you had a chance to use Mingler? I think a few of you did. We were talking earlier with Carolina and Eugene and so on. But for those of you that have not yet, there is a Mingler that's built out of the BioSummit website that's purely for social and really kind of, you can do whatever you want. But we built 4 groups specifically for the governance exercise. And this is what you all are going to do now. You're going to go into this webpage. You can leave your Zoom on. So you can leave your Zoom on while you do this, but just mute yourself in Zoom. And then open up a prompt that you want to work on. So it could be the global network one, the knowledge and resources one, launching community labs and projects, you pick. Then you open up Mingler in here. And let me see if this works. Oh, it's interesting. So it works on my other browser, but not this one. Anyways.
It uses a cookie. If you're on a different browser, it wouldn't remember, I think. Oh, no, that should work.
That's interesting. I tried this earlier.
The easiest way to do by far is if you can log in with Google or log in with Facebook. If any of you have accounts in those places, that's much easier.
Great. Let's try doing this. Okay, brilliant. So I'm inside Build an Inclusive Network, and it looks like there's a few people in there, or at least left over maybe from earlier today. And so once you're in here, this is your lobby, and then you'd pick a person. So I could pick like Sophia, for example. I pick them, and then I'm basically sending them a request. And then if they accept my request, then we would then be launched into a private video chat where then the two of us can talk. And so this is a key part of, I think, what Marshall was describing us earlier about relational work. Actually, it's not just a worksheet, it's you talking in relation to somebody else to kind of discuss your answers and think about things, and then let your own values and experience manifest themselves through that conversation. So that is the experience, and we would love for you to try this.
Just go back to that for a minute, David.
Yeah, sure. Go ahead, Tom.
Just go back to the Mingler page you were on just a minute ago.
Sure.
The one other thing that is probably obvious, but just in case it's not, you can select people on the left that you'd like to talk to. And then you have to wait till they say they want to talk to you. Or you might see somebody who said they wanted to talk to you, and then they would come up on the right there, and you'd have to select them there. The other thing I was going to say is I did look at the different Google Docs earlier this afternoon, and I saw that there are lots of answers in the first one and fewer in the second one and almost none in the last one. So you might want to encourage people, if they have any interest at all in the last topics, to start there this afternoon instead of starting with the first one.
That's great. Yeah, so if you're interested in enabling local educators, we should have given this to the education track. They've been busy all day today. But yeah, if you're interested in that, that would be great. So start at number 4. Don't do number 1. Do number 4 or number 3. Actually, that's a great suggestion, Tom. Thank you. But does this all sound good to everybody? Does this all make sense? So I'm going to put, okay, yeah, the website's already in there, biosummit.lab/governance. You can leave Zoom on, but just mute it. And we will endeavor not to talk here, because if we're talking here, we can give you feedback into your Mingler room. But let's try to do that. And I think Tom's suggestion was right. If you do have a Gmail account, that works super fast for me. You go in through your Gmail and it just brings you right in. So if you've got Gmail, that's a really easy way to do it. Otherwise, you can sign up.
Facebook works too, usually.
Okay. Facebook
Yeah.
and Gmail looks a little bit easier if you want to use those accounts. So Tom, we'll hang out here in the Zoom room, but why doesn't everybody now try to do that? Go over to the biosummit.live/governance page, and then pick one of the Mingler groups, and then go and have fun. See how this works. And I see from far we've got 30 minutes. So why don't we do this for 25 minutes, and then we'll come back together and do a quick debrief at the very end.
And if people have questions or technical problems, I think they can come back to this room
Yes.
and talk about it there. If
Yeah.
you hear,
Do you want to state a specific time for them to come back?
Yeah, 5:25, 5 minutes before.
and if you hear noise from the main Zoom room, you can just pick your Zoom preferences and turn down the volume for the main Zoom room.
Yeah, but you can also just chat. If you've got a technical problem, you can chat us in the Zoom. So, but everybody, why don't you go ahead and give it a shot? Okay, everyone. Farah has been diligently keeping time for us. We are just a couple minutes left. So I want to make sure we have time at least for a quick debrief before we wrap up the session. So if folks can turn off your minglers and turn back your Zooms. I'm seeing a lot of smiling faces, which is really a good sign. Hopefully you all been enjoying your chats. I will share as you guys all kind of work back into this room. Man, Tom, it took a while for me and Young B to get connected. It actually was like a little technically difficult. Like somehow like we clicked on the proceed like twice and 2 Jitsies popped up and we ended up in like an echo chamber of doom. And then like I logged off and then like we both refreshed our screens, but then it both showed that we were in conversations with somebody else. So it like Mingler still thought we were talking to each other even though we were both back in the waiting room again. So
Yeah.
So once we both logged out and then logged back in and then like kind of like, because we were chatting the whole time, like, okay, are you back in? Are you back in? And then once we finally got it, it worked. I mean, it looks like a bunch of people have had seamless interactions and it's been fine. But as we know, like I think there are these little technical glitches just as a part of the game right now.
The version of groups that we were using today was in this part was new. The one
Oh, wow.
in the breaks is the one we've been using all along, and there were several changes in this one that we use today. So any details we can use to reconstruct the bugs would be really helpful in getting rid of them in the future.
Cool. But let's take some quick reactions from folks. I think Chaz, I saw you were in it. It looked like a good conversation. You want to report back how it went?
Yeah. Hey everyone. I spoke with Ronan, who's has done a lot of work with iGEM, and in thinking about education related to the plenary talk we had this morning. We were thinking about the role of these institutions and programs such as iGEMs that fall outside the typical scope of like the education system, and how they can be used to really enrich the educational experiences of students. Yeah, so I mean, it was just a really great conversation. Had a few minor glitches with Mingler, but it ended up working well.
Got it. And what did you think about the format? Were you guys able to make some contributions into the doc and everything?
Yeah, we did.
Great.
Yeah, so I think it was really interesting, and with the prompts and everything, thinking about how our own collective knowledge could be applied to these issues and problems and prompts.
Cool, great. Glad to hear you found it useful. Other comments, other quick comments. We're at 5:30 officially. So if folks have to leave or have another session they can go to, feel free to leave. But we can maybe just take 1 or 2 other quick comments and then we'll wrap up. Any other thoughts from folks? Yeah, Farah, go for it.
I think it's very helpful if you can go into I forget if it was the settings or personalization, and actually put some information about yourself, so it's not just your name, so people know if they want to talk to you, if what you're doing relates in some way to what they're doing, and is you'd be particularly interested in their opinion, and maybe they would be more interested in hearing from you than an average randomized person.
That's a great suggestion. Where did you suggest putting that additional information?
Oh, there is somewhere to put that additional information. It doesn't automatically do it though, so you have to kind of find, let's see if I can find what I clicked on.
Yeah, what
Oh
you've
yeah,
got is-
the settings icon in the upper right.
Got it.
We could also, well, I'm not sure in relation to Mingler, we could add like a column to the attendee list, or people could like just add a link if they have any personal links to that as well.
Well, the ideal, Tom, so we have a participant directory. There's like a giant web page that's a part of the BioSummit where like there's literally 600 profiles of like every single accepted person that's at the BioSummit. What would be of cool is like if when you click on the person, like you hover over it and then like their picture and a little description pops up, you know, so then it's like, oh, like I know Farah's in the Bay Area and interested in, you know, whatever, plant science or whatever it is, right? That would be that would be another neat little thing to add.
Yeah, so we could basically just import a bunch of information about all the people and they wouldn't have to put that in, or maybe even they could be automatically logged in somehow. Not sure.
Yeah, but just giving a little bit of extra metadata, I think is a great point as you're trying to figure out who you want to interact with. And maybe we can take one more other comment before we wrap up. Did anybody else enjoy? I think I saw Dean. You looked like you were having a pretty interesting conversation.
Am I verbal?
You are verbal and auditory.
All right. Yeah, me and Aliki had a nice conversation just about our interests and what brought us here today and for the whole weekend and event. I never did this before. I had forgotten to ask if Aliki have done this before. Yes or no? I'm sorry. Have you? Yeah. All right, so that was cool. I got some better insight into her own interests as we just conversed about why we're here and things along those lines.
Very cool. Did you guys get
and
to
the
try
platform was perfect, just saying.
Oh, good. Okay.
Yeah.
Excellent. Excellent. Were you able to talk about a prompt at all, or did you just? And it's also totally fine, of course, if you just talked about.
We were chatting about community involvement a lot within what we were talking about. Nothing too specific, but just to be general and be snappy with how the conversation went. Yeah, we talked about community a decent amount and how our own interests were actually evolving into the ways that we can spread into our community, etc.
Great. Great.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, we're 3 minutes after our time is up. So just thank you guys so much. Tom, do you have any closing thoughts or comments before we wrap?
I thought this was really cool. We, my partner and I, who I don't think is still here, if she is, please tell us you were here, but we had an interesting discussion and added a whole new question and some options and stuff like that.
Oh, cool. Which sheet were you on, Tom? Which prompt?
The last
prompt
one.
4?
Number 4,
Nice. Great. I'm so glad. Everyone, yeah, this is so fun. So these minglers are up all weekend, 24/7. Hopefully we get some of the Asia folks. They're going to be waking up in a couple of hours. So if any of you are night owls or just don't want to sleep during BioSummit, you can go and interact with Asian colleagues as they start waking up. And yeah, just thank you all so much. We're going to be doing this again in a dedicated fashion on Sunday. So myself and Salman and Shrestha will be setting up a room on Sunday, I think from 3:30 to 5 p.m. Eastern time. So we'll be doing this again. If you want, if you want a time to do this exercise where there's going to be other people in there, 3:30 to 5 on Sunday will be a good time. But we'll be advertising this exercise just throughout the BioSummit, and I'm encouraging people to just check it out. So so pop into those rooms 24/7. If anytime you want to talk about networks and knowledge resources and education, you've got a place to go. So thank you all so much again. Could we get a round of applause and thanks to all of all the folks that have been running the room. So Desiree and Farah, Young B, y'all have been amazing. Thank you so much for making the rooms happen. And did I miss anybody? Is it Young B, Farah, and Desiree? Are there other volunteers helping?
Isis was.
Oh, Isis. Yes, Isis. Thank you so much, Isis, for your help and also for creating that great Google Doc. So if folks want to continue interacting there, please do.
Chaz also helped out with concierging for a bit.
Yes. Shout outs to Chaz, my dude Chaz, stepping up. Thank you, Chaz.
Guys.
And then, of course, thank you so much to Tom. Thanks so much, Tom, for taking the time for the great lecture. And yeah, this has been really cool. I think we've got something here that I think will be useful for BioSummit, but also I think might be something that can be useful for all kinds of communities trying to collaboratively and creatively come up with cool ideas. So,
So Ben and Andy were great, the speakers. So yeah.
Yes.
Oh, is this the last session?
Yeah.
It is.
Oh my God. Oh my God. Okay. Yeah, then in that case, well, Young B, I'll turn it over to you then to just wrap up then.
Yeah, so no, David, you pretty much said everything. And once again, thank you so much to every presenter that took the time and the energy to, put forward their ideas and put forward their methodologies and let us kind of experience all of this in a very hands-on fashion that's very community bio. So I guess at this point, we're pretty much towards the end here, and if people want, I just kind of wanted to point out there's the open mic situation that's happening later. So there's a sign up sheet. I'm not quite sure where, so if someone has a link for it, you can put it in the chat. Also, I just wanted to point out that Drew Endy from Stanford has his plenary talk for the evening at 7 p.m. in the Nucleus room.
Yes.
So super excited about that. And once again, love the participation from everybody, love the presenters, and thank you so much for the people that made the room happen. And let's go out and do some awesome biosummiting.